Hi guys, it's Debbie, and as you can see, we're over in the book corner because today we're speaking about books. In particular, my more uncommon, unusual, weird books. I don't have a huge library-sized collection of books, and some are pretty plain and common, but over the course of time, these shelves expanded to include all sorts of works. I've never been on the lookout for one specific style of book. That is why this is a rather eclectic collection. I don't mean I'm suddenly going to show you a centuries-old Quran or the first original handwritten manuscript for the Harry Potter books. But there are quite a few interesting things here. They're all unique in their own way, and some of them even turned out to be pretty rare, so I thought I'd share everything with you. Now, I'm sure that you own books which are way more unusual, rare, odd, peculiar than the ones I own, so make sure to leave a comment down below letting me know what you think about all the books I show you and what's hiding on your shelves. Now let's dive into the pile of books. The first publication I'd like to show you is this one here, Histoire de France. This book is over 130 years old. This book was published when light bulbs were being invented. This was published I don't know, something like 15 years before tea bags were even invented. And I found it in the trash. Yep, you heard me right, in the trash. During my last year of high school, I went on a trip to France, to a town called Nice. It's a very nice town, it's a popular tourist seaside town, so it's very clean. They're not piles of garbage left around, they're just a regular big dustbins outside the houses. But next to one of these dustbins was a crate filled with all sorts of books, of course put there to be thrown away with the general trash. And we stopped to have a look at those books and we realised they were ridiculously old. Old books are not uncommon. At home, most of us have books belonging to grandparents, parents, so dating back to the 40s, 50s, sometimes even 30s, but that's still pushing on to 90 years. So we couldn't believe we were finding books belonging to the 1800s basically in the trash. Unfortunately, we were running late, so we didn't have time to have a good look through the books. We sort of had to blindly pick, and I eventually came home with this one. Now, after having a look through it, I discovered this is a textbook, a school book owned by a certain Miss Henriette Allons. It's a History of France manual for elementary school kids. I wish it had more notes in it, but it only has a series of crosses and what looks like a doodle of the shape of a bird on the back. But it does have a map of France and the surrounding area at the time, and the history of France is covered until 1887. The rest was all future for them. Unfortunately, this book is in very bad conditions, and I think this is probably the main reason for which it wasn't kept, for which it was being thrown away. But it's still pretty interesting. Another interesting book is one that I included on today's list, mostly because of how rare it is. But if you are from the UK, you might also have a copy of this, and it's probably worth a bit. Now, although this sounds like the introduction to a signed copy of a Charles Dickens novel, this is a book you'll probably recognise from something you might have just recently streamed on Amazon Prime Video. As a matter of fact, this little rare find is nothing more than the original Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. In the world of Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them is a manual of magical creatures compiled by Newt Scamander, an explorer and lover of magical beasts. Throughout the Harry Potter saga, the manual is quoted many times, and recently there has been a film series focusing only on the Fantastic Beasts segment of the Harry Potter world. And the writer of the Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling, also wrote a real-life version of the book. This version of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was published around 20 years ago, when the Harry Potter saga was just beginning to have a huge success, and it was sold for about £2, a part of which then went to charity. But fast forward 2 decades later, and a $30 billion plus dollar worth franchise, they have become very rare to find. Up until a few years ago, bookshops were still selling reprints of the original copies, but they were then withdrawn from the market to create a new version which included more information based on the new film saga. So this made the previous copies even harder to find. This little Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them book is peculiar because it's made to look like Harry Potter's actual copy of the book, with his notes scribbled across the page, along with notes by Ron and Hermione and references to their experiences. For example, the opening page has this written, shared by Ron Weasley because his fell apart. Why don't you buy a new one then? Write on your own book, Hermione. You bought all those dung bombs on Saturday. You could have bought a new book instead. Dung bombs rule. Then there are scribbles and games and various jokes. For example, on one page, there is a reference to an animal that Hagrid had. Hagrid is a character in the Harry Potter saga who has an extreme passion for fantastic beasts, especially dangerous ones. But all across the book, there are various references to experiences that characters had throughout their years at Hogwarts. To make it look even more like Harry Potter's original copy, even the price on the back is indicated first in pounds, so £2.50, and then in the Wizarding World currency, so in sickles and nuts. You can still find some of the original copies online. Most of them are the reprints, and then of course there are thousands of copies of the new version. Unfortunately, my copy is very battered, but if you're from the UK and you were a Harry Potter fan back at the time, have a rummage through your childhood belongings, because if you have this, it's worth a bit. Another little booklet I'd like to quickly mention, and that you might have, is Quidditch Through the Ages, another book that existed in the Harry Potter world and which was recreated in real life. You can see how many characters from the Harry Potter saga took it out from the library, and most of them are characters who are related to the wizarding sport of Quidditch. For example, Oliver Wood. Now, when I was speaking about these books, you heard me use the words worth a lot. And yes, these books are very requested. They are worth quite a bit. But worth a lot doesn't only mean money. Basically, any old book is worth something online. You just have to wait long enough. But the worth in money is not always the most meaningful aspect of a book, or any object in general. The real worth is the personal value you give to a certain object. And if you are speaking of money, usually the books that are worth the most are the most random ones. See these two old battered books? They are novels based on the Jurassic Park and Ninja Turtles worlds. They're about 30 years old. They're from the 90s, which, no, wasn't 10 years ago, and probably sell online for under $10. But if these were to be in good to new condition, they would sell for over $100 each. And they look like something you would pick for £1 at the charity shop. They probably were something our mum picked for £1 at the charity shop. But then at the same time, to prove how worth is relative, I have a lot of Enid Blyton books. Enid Blyton was a famous writer, a children's writer, and I have many of her works, including a collection from her famous Five saga. They're all volumes from the 70s, 80s at the latest, so they are half a century old. But even a good condition of one of these is sold for $5. You would never have imagined that this is worth 20 times more. Anyway, so worth is relative, money is relative. Let's move on to more odd books. So you may have noticed, if the background is not too blurry, that a lot of these titles are in another language. That is because I'm half Italian, I live in Italy, so a lot of these books are in Italian. But there are some other ones in other languages. For example, in German, because I studied German for many years. I quickly mentioned earlier the story of the guy who sold his soul to the devil. That was actually a German book we were given to study during high school in Italy. I always see these posts online of people getting really triggered about what children are apparently being told in schools nowadays. But in Italy, it's perfectly normal to be taught all sorts of weird random things. It just becomes part of your general culture. You might walk into a class and spend a whole hour covering poems, like really depressing poems about death and corpses, or about really intense sexual stories. There was one time our whole year was gathered together in one room to watch Train Spotting as a part of an anti-drug campaign. Another time a police officer got us all together and showed us real footage of people crashing their cars and dying. That was pretty effective. Like having first graders walking around town picking trash up from the streets, or having Latin lessons sitting on the grass outside the school because of an ongoing earthquake. And in our German class, we enjoyed reading books about men selling their souls to the devil. And I still have that copy here with me. It's not something incredibly rare, but it's just something very weird to have. This story from the beginning of the 1800s in order to improve our German conversation skills. But probably even more random is this mammoth book here. Bis zum Morgengrauen, which translated means until dawn, but there is a play on words here which means light until dawn, because this is twilight. This is Twilight in German. In reality, it was a very heartfelt gift that was given to me by a girl a German exchange student who hosted me in her house close to Munich. But it's just so random and huge. Now for the next book, I'm going to cover a story which probably quite a few of you have already heard about, but which I've always found really peculiar because of what it actually speaks about. This book is weird. This is one of those stories you read as a child and it's fine, you reread it as an adult and think, okay, this guy had a weird imagination. I'm speaking about the lesser known sequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Hear me out. So in the first and more famous chapter, Charlie is a very poor kid who, along with a group of various other kids, is given the opportunity to enter and explore a huge and mysterious chocolate factory owned by an equally mysterious man, Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka's factory isn't exactly user-friendly and the kids get trapped in all sorts of adventures. Fast forward to the next book and Charlie and his grandpa travel outside the factory with Willy Wonka inside a glass elevator, which is basically like a little spaceship, but it's just completely transparent. They set off exploring the things, and that's where it gets weird. I don't want to reveal too much because this is a good read, but the characters meet huge, weird space worms. There are odd potions which do very debatable things to your body. There are even a few chapters which cover creepy concepts about the spirit and afterlife and what we are before life, are we actually something, and so on. I always thought that Roald Dahl, the author, had a weird imagination, but in a beautiful way. A lot of the stories he came up with look like something that would belong in a 60s psychedelic party. The Big Friendly Giant is a weirdly narrated but beautiful story of a huge giant who, instead of eating humans, as all the other giants in the story do, during the night sucks dreams from people with a trumpet. George's Marvelous Medicine is another story by Roald Dahl which would never be able to have the same success as nowadays, as the main character, this kid, decides he is too annoyed with his grumpy grandma, and as a punishment he feeds her a concoction of floor polish, shampoo, engine oil, antifreeze, brown paint, you name it. It's fantastic, it's wonderful, but you can clearly see why now in 2020 this could never exist on any child-friendly YouTube channel. So although Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator is probably more well known than all the other titles on today's list, I've always thought of this as something really weird. I thought this was my one and only chance to speak about it with someone. And if you think about it, it's never been covered as much as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which got 3 film adaptations, even one with Johnny Depp. The next book on this degenerated list, which you probably expected to be something completely different, centuries old Quran or J.K. Rowling's first handwritten manuscript of Harry Potter. Anyway, the next book is something you might like if you're into really weird stuff, but with an open mindset, not in the rubbernecking an accident mindset, because the next book is about serial killers. Now you can actually find a ton of material about serial killers out there, mostly because of the morbid popularity of the topic. There's everything from podcasts to Netflix documentaries, but a lot of these play on the sensational aspect of it, the popularity of the goriness. And we've been all victims of that morbid curiosity. But this book here is more of a, okay, I guess you have questions about serial killers, questions you're a bit embarrassed to ask in front of other people, you know, the creepy, real creepy questions. Fire away! We have all the answers, including photos. This book is basically an A to Z manual about murders and specifically serial murders, and it basically tries to explain why a certain fantasy or desire makes sense in a killer's mind. A lot of times when we hear certain things, our immediate reaction is, oh my god, that is unthinkable. And it is. But what this book is trying to do is, hang on a minute, what's the mental process that's going through these people's minds? Why are they doing that? What's the desire they have to do it? How could that desire ever be born? Why does this person find pleasure in doing unthinkable things? Are there similarities with other killers? The book is compiled by Harold Schechter, who specializes in true crime, and it includes passages from previous studies on serial killing, as well as statements from basically the people of Mindhunter, so the actual FBI agents who back at the time stopped the mentality of don't even try to talk to that killer, he's just crazy, let's lock him up, forget about him and hope it never happens again, to, okay, he's crazy, lock him up, but before forgetting about him, let's talk to him, figure out what he's crazy about, and that way we can probably catch the next crazy guy. The most uncommon and weird aspect of this book is the fact that it includes graphic details of the world of serial killing. So it includes sketches drawn by serial killers, fantasizing what they would like to do to a body, or what they have done to bodies in the past. There are even comic books about what these killers think about the society outside, their transcripts of interrogations, their photos that they took of their victims. There is a lot of information, even x-rays of their bodies and what they did to themselves in order to reach pleasure. This is not a book you would pick up because, oh my god, serial killers are so interesting, I'm just going to watch this like 30-minute documentary on YouTube. No, so you've got to have quite an open mind towards it. Now, as we are coming to the end of the video, always ending on a positive tone, there are quite a few other notable mentions. For example, there is a 70-year-old copy of the Divine Comedy, which if you're Italian probably triggered your traumatic high school memories, and then a kid's book about alien Axl Rose landing on top of an Egyptian pyramid inhabited by living mummies. Now I want to know what's sitting on your shelves. Probably books which are way more interesting and uncommon than the ones on my shelves. So make sure to leave a comment down below, letting me know what you thought about all these books and what you have of interesting to show me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye!